Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's rage triggered Annihilation mode. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a symphony of ruin, and Izuku Midoriya was its unwilling conductor. Dust, thick and choking, hung in the air like a shroud, tasting of pulverized concrete and bitter ash. It clogged his throat and stung his eyes, mingling with the sweat that plastered his torn green and black costume to his bruised skin. Every ragged breath was a battle, every movement a negotiation with screaming muscles and bones that felt perilously close to giving way. The vibrant green lightning of One for All, usually a comforting and powerful aura, now flickered around him at 45%, a strained and desperate hum that felt woefully inadequate. He was losing. They were all losing. Tamura Shigaraki stood at the epicenter of the devastation, a pale specter of absolute destruction. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a walking natural disaster, a plague given form. The waves of his decay quirk, now terrifyingly enhanced, pulsed outwards, turning the very ground to gray dust that billowed away on the hot, acrid wind. Heroes who had stood tall moments before were now either grievously wounded or forced into a frantic, chaotic retreat. Gran Torino, his mentor's mentor, a living legend, lay broken and bleeding not 50 feet away, a testament to Shigaraki's casual, brutal strength. Aizawa-sensei, their anchor and greatest defense, had been taken out of the fight by a quirk-erasing bullet, his leg crushed, his desperate gambit to protect his students costing him dearly. Rock Lock, Manuel, and dozens of other pro-heroes were scattered, their efforts to contain the monster amounting to little more than throwing pebbles against the tidal wave. Is this all? Shigaraki's voice, a rasp that scraped at the nerves, echoed across the wasteland of what was once Jaka's city. He took a slow, deliberate step, the ground dissolving under his boot. Is this the best the Age of Heroes has to offer? A broken old man, a crippled teacher, and a boy playing dress-up? Deku grit his teeth, the force of it sending a spike of pain through his jaw. He shifted his weight, his legs trembling not from fear, but from sheer, bone-deep exhaustion. He had been pushing himself harder, and for longer, than ever before. Black whip tendrils, shimmering with green energy, erupted from his back, anchoring him to slabs of surviving architecture as he prepared to launch himself forward again. I have to stop him. I have to be the one. The mantra was a frantic drumbeat in his skull, a desperate prayer against the encroaching tide of failure. The vestiges of One for All were a silent, tense pressure in the back of his mind, their combined will focused entirely on the descendant of their eternal enemy. You talk too much. A gruff voice barked from his right. Katsuki Bakugo landed beside him in a controlled explosion, his gauntlets smoking. His face was a mask of grim determination, streaked with soot and sweat, but his crimson eyes burned with an undiminished fire. Just shut up and die already, you damn patchwork freak! Kaken, no! His decay! I know how his damn quirk works, Deku! Bakugo shot back, not sparing him a glance. His focus was locked on Shigaraki. We just need an opening. A single goddamn second. Beside them, Endeavor roared, unleashing a torrent of incandescent flame. Hell Curtain! A wall of fire, hundreds of feet high, erupted between them and Shigaraki, buying them a precious moment. The heat was so intense it felt like it was blistering Deku's skin even from this distance. Now, Shoto! The number one hero bellowed. From the other side, Shoto Todoroki responded in kind. A colossal wave of ice surged forward, crashing against the wall of fire. The resulting explosion of steam was deafening, a meteorological event born of raw power that blanketed the entire area in a thick, blinding fog. This was their plan. A desperate pincer movement designed to overwhelm Shigaraki's senses. Deku knew his role. He crouched low, pouring more of Ofei's power into his legs, the green lightning flaring brighter. 45%. It's not enough. He's too fast, too strong. But if I go higher? He could feel the familiar, treacherous ache in his bones, the warning sign that he was approaching the limit of what his body could contain. A limit that was feeling closer and closer with every passing minute. Go! Bakugo screamed, launching himself into the steam cloud with a series of concussive blasts. A human missile aimed at their foe. Deku followed a second later, Black Whip and Float propelling him through the disorienting whiteout. He used danger sense to navigate, the quirk a sharp, stabbing alarm in his temples, guiding him toward the nexus of threat, Shigaraki. He burst through the steam just as Bakugo unleashed an AP shot directly at Shigaraki's head. The villain didn't even flinch. A series of black and red tendrils, the horrifying signature of All for One's power, shot from his back and deflected the blast with contemptuous ease. The rivet stab quirk. Faster and deadlier than ever before, Shigaraki's eyes, burning with malevolent glee, locked onto Deku. There you are, ninth. I was starting to get bored. He moved. It wasn't a step or a run, it was a violation of physics. One moment he was 30 feet away, the next he was directly in front of Deku, his hand outstretched, fingers splayed, ready to turn him to dust. Danger sense didn't just warn him, it shrieked, a piercing mental siren of imminent death. Deku reacted on pure instinct, firing black whip tendrils into the ground behind him and wrenching himself sideways. The tips of Shigaraki's fingers grazed his shoulder, and the fabric of his costume instantly disintegrated, a horrifying fizzing sound accompanying the decay that ate into the armor plating beneath. A fraction of a second slower, and his arm would have been gone. He tumbled, rolling to absorb the momentum, and came up into a crouch. He could see the full picture now. Endeavor was circling from above, preparing another attack. Todoroki was laying down suppressing fields of ice, trying to limit Shigaraki's mobility. But it was Bakugo who was closest, his explosions peppering Shigaraki's defenses, forcing him to keep his attention divided. Is that it? Bakugo snarled, firing another blast. Can't even land a hit on a moving target? Shigaraki's head snapped towards Bakugo, his expression shifting from amusement to irritation. You are an insect. A loud, pointless gnat buzzing in my ear. Then come on and swat me, you son of a bitch! Bakugo roared, a challenge that sent a spear of ice-cold fear through Deku's heart. No, Kaken, don't draw his focus. But it was too late. Shigaraki seemed to decide he'd had enough of the games. The ground around him exploded outwards in a massive, expanding circle of decay. Todoroki's ice field shattered and vanished. Bakugo was forced to blast himself into the air to avoid being turned to dust. And in that moment of aerial vulnerability, Shigaraki struck. He ignored Endeavor's descending fire blast. He ignored Deku, who was already coiling to launch a Manchester smash. His target was singular. A dozen rivet stab tendrils, sharp as surgical steel and black as the void, shot from his back, converging on one point in the sky. On Bakugo. Time seemed to warp, stretching and thinning like molten glass. Deku saw it all with horrifying clarity. He saw the tendrils slicing through the air. He saw the flicker of surprise, then grim acceptance, in Bakugo's eyes. He saw himself, feet pushing off the ground, a desperate, silent scream tearing from his lungs. He wasn't going to make it. He was too slow. Too far. He was going to fail. He was going to watch his oldest friend, his rival, the person who had defined so much of his journey, die right in front of him. The thought was not just unbearable. It was an impossibility. A tear in the fabric of his reality. And then something else happened. Something that defied his understanding of the boy he thought he knew so well. Bakugo, suspended in midair, twisted his body. He fired a small, precise blast from one palm, not to attack, not to dodge, but to change his trajectory. It was a tiny, insignificant movement, a push. He slammed into Deku's side, knocking him out of the path of the converging tendrils. Deku stumbled, his forward momentum broken, his eyes wide with uncomprehending shock as Bakugo's momentum carried him forward, directly into the space Deku had just occupied. The sound was sickening. A wet, percussive series of thuds, like a butcher's cleaver hitting a side of meat. Deku watched, paralyzed, as at least 5 of the black tendrils punched clean through Bakugo's body. They pierced his shoulder, his abdomen, his side. Blood, shockingly bright against the grim backdrop of the battlefield, exploded from the wounds in a fine mist. For a single, silent heartbeat, Bakugo just hung there, impaled and suspended. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. A thin line of blood trickled from the corner of his lips. His crimson eyes, wide with shock and agony, found Deku's, and then he fell. No. He didn't fall. Shigaraki didn't let him. The tendrils held him fast. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion that was infinitely more cruel than the initial attack, Shigaraki twisted them. A choked, agonized sound was ripped from Bakugo's throat. His body convulsed, a marionette of pain on strings of living shadow. Shigaraki drew the impaled form closer, holding him up like a trophy, a bloody, broken shield between himself and Deku. The world stopped. The roar of Endeavor's flames, the frantic shouts of the other heroes, the very sound of his own frantic heartbeat, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. There was only the sight before him, Bakugo, bleeding, dying, and the triumphant, mocking face of the monster holding him. "See Izuku Midoriya?" Shigaraki's voice was a soft, venomous caress. He tilted his head, a gesture of mock sympathy. "All that power! The legacy of 8 heroes burning inside you. And for what? You can't even save one person. The one person who has, in his own twisted way, always been by your side." He gave the tendrils another slight turn. Bakugo gasped, his head lolling forward. "Was it worth it?" Shigaraki continued, his words like acid. "This pathetic, useless sacrifice? He pushed you out of the way, thinking he was being a hero. But all he did was prove how weak you are. He died because you weren't strong enough. He was always just a stepping stone for your story, wasn't he? The angry rival you had to surpass. Now he's just a footnote." Deku's mind fractured. The grief was a physical blow, a gaping wound in his chest so vast and deep he thought it might swallow him whole. It was the memory of 1,000 shared moments, of being bullied in a playground, of a hand offered in a river, of fierce competition in the training grounds, of a quiet apology after a fight. It was the crushing, absolute certainty of loss. A scream of pure, undiluted anguish began to build in his throat. But then, something else rose up to meet it, something cold, something ancient and dark. The grief, hot and sharp, began to curdle. The despair, a bottomless pit, began to harden. The overwhelming sadness boiled away under a sudden, terrifying heat, leaving behind a core of pure, crystalline rage. It wasn't the hot-headed anger of a sparring match, or the righteous fury of seeing a villain hurt a civilian. This was different. This was the silent, absolute rage of a protector who had failed utterly. It was the rage of a god watching its world burn. It was the rage of a boy who had just watched his reason for becoming stronger be murdered as a tool to mock him. Shigaraki's words, useless sacrifice, weak, footnote, echoed in the sudden, vast silence of his mind, and something inside Izuku Midoriya broke. The green lightning of full cowling, which had been flickering wildly, sputtered. For a single, terrifying second, it died completely, plunging him into shadow. The heroes watching held their breath, thinking he had finally collapsed from exhaustion. Then, the energy returned. But it wasn't green. It was black. Jagged, violent arcs of obsidian lightning, veined with a deep, blood-red corruption, erupted from his body. It didn't hum with power. It shrieked, a sound like tearing reality, like 1,000 souls screaming at once. The ground beneath his feet didn't just crack. It blackened and smoked, the very stones seeming to recoil from the profane energy. Deku lifted his head. His green eyes, usually so full of life and empathy and unshed tears, were gone. In their place were 2 solid, blazing discs of malevolent crimson light, devoid of pupil or iris. They were not the eyes of Izuku Midoriya. They were the eyes of a predator, of a force of nature, of pure, undiluted annihilation. The scream that had been building in his throat finally escaped, but it was not the sound of a grieving boy. It was a guttural, inhuman roar that shook the very foundations of the ruined city. It was a sound of pure wrath, a declaration of intent so absolute and terrifying that it silenced every other noise on the battlefield. Heroes and villains alike froze, a primal, instinctual fear gripping them. Endeavor, hovering in the sky, felt the pressure wave hit him like a physical blow, his own flames flickering in the violent surge of energy. What is that?" he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. Inside the vestige realm, the calm, ethereal space where the previous users of One for All resided was ripped apart. It was no longer a realm of quiet contemplation but a psychic hurricane. A maelstrom of black and crimson energy tore through their shared consciousness, a vortex of pure, unadulterated rage. Yoichi Shigaraki, The first screamed as his form flickered and distorted, the raw hatred aimed at his brother's successor overwhelming his very essence. It's happening! He triggered it! Nana Shimura's spectral form was barely holding together. She looked on in horror at the ninth, whose glowing silhouette stood at the heart of the storm. But it wasn't him. It was a hollow vessel filled with their collective agony, their desperation, their centuries of focused rage against all for one, now unleashed and untethered. No! Izuku, my boy, fight it! She cried, but her voice was lost in the tempest. The second and third users, their faces grim masks of forgotten history, braced themselves against the psychic onslaught. The failsafe. The second grunted, his form wavering like a candle in a gale. The desperation protocol. We never wanted it to be used. It was the Quirk's wrath. A doomsday weapon buried deep in the core of One for All, forged from the darkest emotions of all who had wielded it. A berserker state designed for one purpose and one purpose only, the complete and utter annihilation of their nemesis, at any cost. Even the cost of the user himself. On the battlefield, Shigaraki watched the transformation with a flicker of confusion that quickly morphed into intrigued arrogance. He still held Bakugo's limp body, a shield of flesh he believed made him untouchable. A new trick, ninth? How delightful! Does it matter? You're still just a child playing with fire. He was wrong. This wasn't fire. It was the void. The red-eyed Deku, the thing that wore his face, vanished. There was no burst of speed, no flicker of green light. One moment he was there, roaring, wreathed in chaotic energy. The next, the space he occupied was empty. Shigaraki's enhanced senses, a gift from his master, screamed a warning a fraction of a second too late. He felt, rather than saw, the impact. It wasn't a punch. A smash was a focused application of power. This was different. This was a wave of pure, kinetic force, a blunt force trauma event on a conceptual level. It struck Shigaraki's chest, and the sound was not the crack of bone, but the deafening whump of a depth charge detonating. The rivet-stabbed tendrils holding Bakugo shattered like brittle glass. Bakugo's body was thrown free, tumbling limply through the air as Shigaraki himself was launched backwards. A pale cannonball shot across the cityscape. He slammed through the remains of 3 separate buildings, his flight path a perfect line of destruction, before finally crashing into the skeletal frame of a skyscraper half a mile away, the entire structure groaning and threatening to collapse. A stunned silence fell. Todoroki, who had been creating an ice ramp to try and catch Bakugo, froze mid-stride, his jaw slack. Endeavor stared, his mind unable to process the sheer, impossible velocity. Bakugo's body fell, but it did not hit the ground. A single, dark tendril, faster than thought, shot from Deku's back, wrapped gently around Bakugo's torso, and deposited him near the edge of the battle zone, placing him down with an almost reverent gentleness that was utterly at odds with the maelstrom of power consuming its master. Then, the red-eyed thing turned its attention back to Shigaraki. Its form blurred again. It crossed the half-mile distance in less than a second, arriving at the base of the broken skyscraper before Shigaraki had even managed to pull himself from the wreckage. From Shigaraki's perspective, it was a nightmare. His hyper-regeneration was working overtime, knitting together shattered ribs and ruptured organs. The damage was wrong. It wasn't just physical. It felt like the energy itself was corrosive, fighting his healing factor at a cellular level. He staggered to his feet, coughing up blood and regenerated tissue, his mind reeling. What was that power? It felt like Master's, but more hateful. He looked up just as the monster arrived. It didn't speak. It didn't posture. It simply raised a hand, and the black and crimson energy coalesced, forming not a fist, but a churning vortex of destructive force. Annihilation mode. Deku slammed his hand downwards. He didn't hit Shigaraki. He hit the ground in front of him. The result was apocalyptic. The earth itself screamed. The entire foundation of the skyscraper and the city block around it was obliterated in a colossal explosion of dark energy and shattered earth. It wasn't decay, which turned things to dust. This was pure, unadulterated obliteration. Matter was torn apart, atomized by the sheer, violent force. Shigaraki was thrown into the air, his regeneration struggling to cope as the shockwave tore at him. Before he could reorient himself, the monster was on him again, a phantom of rage in the sky. This time, it was a punch. A wild, unrefined swing that carried all the force of the previous blast concentrated into a single point. It connected with Shigaraki's side, and the sound barrier broke twice, once from the movement itself, and once from the impact. The remaining heroes could only watch in mute horror. The boy they knew, the kind, crying, smiling hero in training who meticulously planned his every move and agonized over every injury he caused, was gone. In his place was a demon of vengeance, a terrifying force of nature fighting with instinctual, predatory violence. He wasn't using strategy. He wasn't using named attacks. He was simply moving from one point of destruction to the next, his entire being focused on a single, unwavering goal: to erase Tamura Shigaraki from existence. Black tendrils, no longer precise whips but chaotic, lashing appendages of solidified wrath, tore through the air around him. They didn't capture or bind, they ripped, tore, and smashed. They slammed into buildings, reducing them to rubble. They tore gaping chasms in the ground. The battlefield was no longer a fight between two people. It was the death throe of a city, and Deku was the cause. From his vantage point, Shoto Todoroki finally moved. He wasn't thinking about the villain anymore. He was thinking about the unconscious, bleeding form of Bakugo, and the friend who had become a monster to avenge him. He created a path of ice, sliding down towards Bakugo, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and a new, chilling fear he had never felt before. He had seen his father's rage. He had seen villain's madness. This was something else entirely. This was emptiness. A void that had taken the shape of his friend. Endeavor remained frozen in the sky, his own flame seeming dim and cold in comparison to the profane energy radiating from the void below. He watched as Deku slammed Shigaraki into the ground again and again, the impact sending seismic shocks through the city. Shigaraki's regeneration, the ultimate defense that had rendered all their efforts useless, was visibly failing. He was being broken faster than he could heal. This power, it was absolute. It was the kind of power that could win the war, and that was the most terrifying thought of all. He looked over at Shoto, who was now shielding Bakugo's body with a wall of ice, his face pale. He saw the same horror reflected in his son's mismatched eyes. They weren't watching a hero win a fight. They were watching the birth of something terrible and new, a power far too great for any one person to wield. They were watching a hero become a weapon of mass destruction. And as the guttural, soul-shaking roar of the thing that was once Izuku Midoriya echoed one last time across the ruins, Endeavor knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his very core, that even if they won today, they may have already lost everything. The barrage was relentless. It was a storm of pure kinetic fury, each blow landing with the force of an artillery shell. Izuku Midoriya, or the crimson-eyed thing wearing his form, had become a living earthquake, a gravity well of violence from which Tamura Shigaraki could not escape. There was no finesse, no technique, just the brutal, primal instinct to destroy. Shigaraki slammed into the ground for the 5th time, the impact creating another spiderweb of fractures in the already tormented earth. His hyper-regeneration, the divine gift from his master that had made him feel invincible, was sputtering. It was a frantic, desperate process now, weaving torn muscle and shattered bone back together with a visible, grotesque speed, only for the next blow to tear it all apart again. The energy that coursed through the Ninth's fists was a poison. It didn't just break him, it unmade him, leaving behind a residue of annihilating force that his regeneration fought against like a body rejecting a diseased organ. A flicker of an emotion other than rage crossed his face, disbelief, bordering on fear. This wasn't the power he was meant to inherit. One for All was supposed to be a tool of stockpiled strength. This was a curse, a hateful, sentient wrath that wanted nothing more than to erase him. Through Shigaraki's eyes, All for One watched, his ancient, calculating mind racing. He had coveted One for All for a century, but this was a corruption. A self-destruct mechanism. To try and steal the quirk in this state would be like trying to drink from a poisoned chalice. It might destroy the vessel itself. Tamura, pull back! Now! The command was not a suggestion. It was a psychic shriek of alarm from his master, but Shigaraki couldn't. The monster gave him no quarter. Before he could even think to phase through the ground or warp away, it was upon him again. It grabbed his head, its grip like a hydraulic press, and slammed him into the concrete with enough force to liquefy the stone beneath them. Then it dragged him, scraping a trench through the battlefield as his regeneration fought to replace the skin and flesh being flayed from his back. From the sky, Endeavor watched, his own flames feeling like paltry candlelight. He saw the moment of hesitation in Shigaraki, the briefest pause as All for One attempted to wrest control. It was the only opening they were going to get. Now! He roared, a command to anyone who could still fight. But before any hero could move, a low hum began to emanate from the thing that was once Deku. It grew in pitch and volume, a keening whine that vibrated in the teeth and bones of everyone for a mile in every direction. The monster had Shigaraki pinned, one foot on his chest, but its attention was elsewhere. It was gathering power for a final, definitive strike. It raised its free hand to the sky. The chaotic, jagged arcs of black and crimson energy that wreathed its body began to flow towards that hand, coalescing into a sphere of churning, unstable darkness. It was not a ball of light, but a vortex of anti-light, a sphere of pure absence that drank the very color from the air around it. The dust, the smoke, the pale light of the sky, it all seemed to bend inwards towards the growing orb of death. The air pressure plummeted. It became hard to breathe. Shoto Todoroki, standing over Bakugo's still form, felt it. The raw, terrifying pressure of a power that dwarfed anything he had ever experienced. It was more absolute than his father's fire, more final than Shigaraki's decay. It was the power of an ending. Midoriya, stop! He whispered, the words lost in the shriek of gathering energy. He knew, with a sinking certainty, what was about to happen. That attack wouldn't just obliterate Shigaraki, it would obliterate the entire city block. It would obliterate them all. This was the moment All for One had been waiting for. While the monster was focused on its ultimate attack, he poured all of his will into his connection with Shigaraki. The ground beneath the pinned villain suddenly warped and twisted, a slurry of half-decayed matter and strange liquid, the forced activation of multiple quirks at once. Shigaraki's body sank into the muck, a desperate, messy escape. The monster's red eyes snapped down, its roar of fury shaking the heavens as its prey slipped through its grasp. It was too late. Shigaraki was gone, ripped from the battlefield by his master in a panicked, undignified retreat. The target was gone. But the power remained. The sphere of annihilation, now the size of a small car, pulsed violently in the monster's hand, hungry and unused. Its head tilted, its empty red eyes scanning the ruined landscape, searching for its enemy. Finding nothing, its base instinct took over. If the target cannot be located, destroy everything. It began to bring its arm down, and then it stopped. The arm froze, trembling, halfway through its downward arc. The entire body locked up, caught in a violent, full-body seizure. The black and crimson lightning that enveloped it flared to a blinding intensity, and then, in a single, silent instant, it vanished. The oppressive pressure, the deafening whine, the soul-crushing dread, it all winked out of existence as if it had never been. The power had consumed its fuel. For a moment, Izuku Midoriya's body just hung there in the air, suspended by the last vestiges of float. Then, like a marionette with its strings suddenly cut, he fell. There was no grace, no control. He dropped like a stone, crashing onto a pile of rubble with a sickening, final crunch of breaking bones. He lay there, a broken, smoking heap. His costume was shredded, great patches of his skin exposed. The vibrant green of his hero's suit was now mostly black and gray, charred and covered in ash. His body was unnaturally still, a thin trail of smoke, smelling of ozone and burnt flesh, curling up from his back. He was not moving. He was not breathing. And then, a profound silence fell over Jaka City. It was a silence more deafening than any explosion. The fighting had stopped. The shouting had ceased. The roar of flames and the crackle of ice were gone. All that remained was the whisper of the wind through skeletal buildings and the thick, heavy quiet of absolute shock. Heroes and the few remaining villains stood frozen, their gazes locked on the small, unmoving figure at the center of the devastation. They weren't looking at a victorious hero or a fallen comrade. They were staring at the shell of the bomb that had just saved and terrified them in equal measure. The fear was a tangible thing, a cold blanket that settled over the battlefield. They had not been afraid of losing to Shigaraki. They were afraid of what had just won. On a distant rooftop, Hawk stood, his wings flared, his usual nonchalant demeanor completely gone. His sharp eyes took in the scene, his mind processing 1,000 data points a second. The strategic implications were staggering. An asset that can defeat Shigaraki. A threat that can level a city. And it's a 16-year-old boy who has no control. His hand instinctively went to his side, where a single crimson feather was clutched, feeling a tremor run through it that had nothing to do with the wind. Mirko, her body a canvas of brutal injuries, leaned against a piece of debris, her breath coming in ragged pants. She had fought her entire life fueled by instinct and adrenaline, but the ferocity she had just witnessed made her own battle lust feel like a child's tantrum. It was predatory, absolute, and utterly devoid of a soul. It was Shoto Todoroki who broke the spell. His breath itched, a sharp, painful gasp in the crushing silence. He looked from the still, pale face of Katsuki Bakugo, lying on the slab of ice he'd created, to the broken form of Midoriya, concern warred with a deep, primal dread in his chest. The thing he had just seen was not his friend. It was a monster. But the boy lying in the rubble, smoking and shattered, that was Izuku. He started forward, his boots crunching on the debris. "Shoto, wait!" Endeavor's voice boomed from above, a note of caution, of command. Shoto ignored him. He broke into a run, creating a smooth, clean path of ice over the jagged ruins, a desperate attempt to bring order to the chaos. He slid to a halt a few feet from Midoriya, the cold from his quirk doing little to quell the frantic heat of his own pounding heart. He knelt, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions. He reached out a hand, then hesitated, his fingers trembling. The sheer destructive power that had radiated from that body moments ago was gone, but the memory of it was seared into his mind. He finally rested his fingers on Midoriya's neck, searching for a pulse. For a terrifying second, there was nothing. Then, he felt it. A weak, thready, impossibly fast flutter. A hummingbird's heartbeat. He was alive. "He's alive!" Shoto called out, his voice cracking with a relief so profound it almost brought him to his knees. As if his words were the signal, the world lurched back into motion. Medics began to move, heroes started coordinating, the machinery of disaster response grinding back to life. Endeavor landed beside his son, his massive form casting a long shadow. He looked down at Midoriya, his face grim. The boy's skin was a horror show. Where it wasn't bruised or torn, it was covered in strange, feathery, branching patterns of deep red and purple, like crimson fractals blooming under the epidermis. They looked like frozen lightning, a permanent scar left by the unholy energy that had possessed him. Lichtenberg figures. The mark of a massive electrical discharge. "What in the hell was that, Shoto?" Endeavor asked, his voice low, stripped of its usual bravado. "I don't know," Shoto replied, his eyes never leaving Midoriya's face. "But it was going to kill us all." A flurry of movement heralded the arrival of the first high-speed medical response unit. At its head was the diminutive but formidable figure of Recovery Girl. She took one look at the scene, the sheer scale of the localized destruction, the strange burns on Midoriya's body, the readings from the portable scanner in her hand, and her professional calm shattered. A look of pure, unadulterated horror crossed her face. "Great heavens!" she breathed, rushing to his side. She knelt, her hands glowing with the soft green light of her quirk, but she didn't dare use it yet. First, she had to assess the damage. Her instruments chirped and whirred, feeding her data that seemed impossible. "His bones," she murmured, her voice trembling. "They aren't just broken. The microfractures, it's like they've been ground into dust from the inside out. His entire skeletal structure is compromised." She ran a scanner over his chest. "Multiple organ ruptures, severe internal hemorrhaging, and his bioelectric readings are off the charts. It's a miracle his heart hasn't just exploded." She gently touched one of the crimson fractal burns on his arm. "And this isn't a thermal burn. It's like radiation. The energy itself was cytotoxic. It attacked him on a cellular level. His own power was consuming him." Her gaze hardened, a grim, terrible understanding dawning. "To heal this, it won't be like healing a broken bone. This is like trying to rebuild a house after the foundation has been turned to sand. Every cell in his body is screaming in agony. She looked up at Endeavor, her eyes filled with a terrifying gravity. Get him to Central Hospital. Now. He needs a full life support system and a reinforced containment room. We don't know if that energy is still latent. As the specialized medical team carefully loaded Midoriya onto a reinforced stretcher, another figure arrived. Toshinori Yagi, in his skeletal form, stumbled through the debris, his pace frantic. He had watched the entire battle unfold on a monitor from the command center, a helpless, horrified spectator. He had seen the transformation. He had heard the roar. He had seen the power he had bestowed upon this boy twist into something monstrous. His eyes, sunken and shadowed, fell upon the stretcher. He saw the unnatural stillness of his successor, the strange, terrible burns, the wisp of smoke still rising from his ruined costume. The hope of the world, the next symbol of peace, looked like a casualty of war, a victim of his own power. Toshinori's shoulders, which had been held with a desperate, rigid straightness, slumped. A dry, hacking cough racked his thin frame, the physical manifestation of his soul-deep despair. He had seen Nana Shimura die. He had felt his own body be torn apart by All for One. But this felt like a new, more profound kind of failure. He hadn't just failed to protect his student. He had handed him the weapon that was now destroying him from the inside out. He saw the ashes of the city around him, and in the broken body of Izuku Midoriya, he saw the ashes of his own legacy. Days blurred into a haze of pain, a dissonant symphony of beeping machines, muted voices, and the constant, throbbing agony that seemed to live in his very marrow. Consciousness was a distant shore he occasionally washed up on, only to be pulled back under by a tide of medically induced sleep. He had fragmented dreams, a flash of crimson eyes, the feeling of falling, a desperate, silent scream. But nothing coherent. Nothing that explained the all-consuming pain. When he finally surfaced for good, the world came into focus slowly. The first thing he registered was the ceiling. It was white, sterile, and featureless. The second was the sound, a steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. His heart, he presumed. The third was the smell, antiseptic and clean. A hospital. He tried to move, and a constellation of fire ignited along every nerve ending in his body. A low groan escaped his lips. The pain was breathtaking, but it was also a confirmation. He was alive. Young Midoriya? The voice was quiet, gravelly, and saturated with a weariness so profound it seemed to have physical weight. Deku turned his head, a simple movement that felt like lifting a mountain. Sitting in a chair beside his bed was All Might. He looked old. Older than Deku had ever seen him. The usual faint spark of defiant fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow, exhausted sorrow. The lines on his face seemed deeper, his frame even more gaunt, as if he had personally carried the weight of the entire battle on his own thin shoulders. All Might! Deku's voice was a dry, rasping whisper. His throat felt like sandpaper. All Might leaned forward, a glass of water with a straw already in his hand. Easy, my boy. Don't try to talk too much. Deku took a few sips, the cool water a balm on his raw throat. His mind was a fog, a landscape of confusing, terrifying memory fragments. But one image was crystal clear, a shard of glass embedded in his brain, Bakugo, impaled on black tendrils. His eyes, wide with shock and pain, finding his. The mocking laughter of Shigaraki. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of medication. Kaken! He rasped, his eyes wide, locking on All Might. Shigaraki, he... Kaken is he... He couldn't bring himself to say the word. A flicker of pained emotion crossed All Might's face before he carefully schooled it. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Young Bakugo is alive, my boy. His injuries were severe. Grievous. But he is a fighter. He's in a different wing of this hospital, but he's stable. He's going to make it. A wave of relief so powerful it left him dizzy washed over Deku. Tears he didn't have the strength to form pricked at the corners of his eyes. He's alive. Kaken's alive. It was the only thing that mattered. And Shigaraki? Deku asked, his voice a little stronger now. Did we Did we stop him? He retreated. All Might confirmed, his tone carefully neutral. The League of Villains suffered massive losses. The Paranormal Liberation Front is shattered. From a strategic standpoint, it was a victory. Deku's brow furrowed. Victory? But that didn't make sense. He closed his eyes, trying to piece it together. The last thing he remembered was the overwhelming despair, the feeling of absolute failure as those tendrils shot towards him. He remembered Bakugo pushing him, the horrifying sound of the impact, the sight of his friend being held up like a piece of meat, and then, nothing. A void. A black hole in his memory. But how? Deku whispered, looking at his hands. They were bandaged, but he could feel the network of tubes and sensors attached to them. I wasn't strong enough. He was right there, and I was too slow. I failed. How did we win? The air in the room grew heavy. All Might leaned back in his chair, the plastic creaking under his slight weight. He looked away from Deku, staring at the blank wall as if the words he needed were written there. After young Bakugo was struck, he began, his voice low and measured. Something happened. Something changed in you, my boy. A power we didn't know you had, a power we didn't know was in One for All. It came out. Deku stared at him, confused. A new quirk? No, All Might said, finally meeting his gaze. His eyes were filled with a mixture of awe and profound fear. Not a new quirk. It was One for All. But it was corrupted. Twisted. It was a power of pure, uncontrolled destruction. You were not yourself, young Midoriya. You moved faster than anything I have ever seen. You struck with a force that defied physics. You drove Shigaraki back, broke his regeneration, and forced All for One himself to orchestrate a panicked retreat. Deku's mind struggled to grasp the words. Me? I did that? It sounded like a story about someone else. A powerful, terrifying stranger. He looked down at his broken, bandaged body. This was the cost of that power. I don't remember, he confessed, the words tasting like ash. I remember Kaken, the pain, and then, nothing. It's just black. A hole. All Might nodded slowly, a deep, sorrowful sigh escaping his lips. We know. You were unconscious for 5 days. The doctors say it's a form of dissociative amnesia, a protective measure by your mind to shield you from the trauma. He paused, his expression hardening with a terrible gravity. Or perhaps, from the memory of what you did. The steady beep of the heart monitor seemed to grow louder in the ensuing silence. Deku felt a new kind of fear, one that had nothing to do with villains or getting hurt. It was a cold, internal dread that coiled in the pit of his stomach. He was a hero. His purpose was to save people, but All Might was speaking of him like he was a natural disaster, a weapon that had been deployed. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry again. He had to know. He had to understand the blank space in his mind. He looked at his mentor, his hero, and asked the question that hung in the sterile air between them, heavy and full of unspoken horror. All Might, what did I do? All Might did not answer immediately. He seemed to age another decade in the silent moments that followed Izuku's question. The skin around his sunken eyes tightened, and he ran a thin, trembling hand over his face, as if trying to wipe away the image in his own mind before describing it. The weight of his silence was a heavier burden than any physical injury. It is difficult to explain, my boy, he finally said, his voice strained. Words do not properly convey the scale of it. He gestured to a small, sleek tablet resting on the bedside table. Perhaps it is better if you see for yourself. But I must warn you, what you are about to witness is distressing. A cold knot of dread tightened in Izuku's stomach. Distressing. Coming from the man who had faced All for One and survived, the word carried an apocalyptic weight. Still, he had to know. The void in his memory was a terrifying abyss, and he feared what might be hiding in it more than he feared the truth. He gave a weak, determined nod. With a heavy sigh, All Might picked up the tablet. His fingers, usually so steady, fumbled slightly as he tapped the screen. He angled it so Izuku could see, his own eyes refusing to look at the display. The screen flickered to life, showing a chaotic, grainy image from what looked like a news helicopter's camera, shot from a great distance. The audio was a mess of wind, distant alarms, and the panicked voice of a news anchor. In the center of the frame was a scene of utter devastation, a wasteland of rubble and skeletal buildings that had once been a thriving part of Jaka City. And at the epicenter of it all were two figures. One was a pale, ragged form that Izuku recognized with a jolt as Shigaraki. The other, Izuku's breath caught in his throat. The other figure was him. Or a nightmarish effigy of him. It wore the tattered remains of his costume, but it was wreathed in a violent, shrieking storm of black and crimson energy. Jagged, uncontrolled arcs of this profane lightning lashed out, tearing apart the ground and surrounding structures with casual, incidental force. Its movements were impossibly fast, a series of violent blurs and impacts that the camera could barely track. But it was the eyes that made his blood run cold. Even from this distance, through the low-resolution feed, he could see them. Two solid, glowing discs of pure, malevolent red. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of the boy he knew himself to be. It was a gaze of absolute, inhuman emptiness, a predator's focus fixed solely on its prey. The video played on. He watched in mute horror as this monstrous version of himself brutalized Shigaraki. It wasn't a fight, it was a dismemberment. There was no heroism in it, no sense of justice. It was pure, unadulterated violence. He saw himself slam Shigaraki through buildings, punch him with enough force to create sonic booms, and drag him through the earth like a ragdoll. The sheer, unrestrained power was terrifying. This wasn't one for all as he knew it. This was something else entirely. Something hateful. The video culminated in the final, aborted attack. He saw the monster raise its hand, gathering a sphere of absolute darkness, a void that seemed to consume the very light around it. He felt a phantom pressure in his own chest, a memory of power so immense it threatened to tear reality asunder. He saw it begin to swing its arm down, an attack that would have undoubtedly leveled what was left of the city, and everyone in it. He saw himself try to kill everyone. Then, just as abruptly as it began, he saw the monster freeze, convulse, and collapse. The dark energy vanished, leaving behind only the broken, smoking body of a 16-year-old boy. The video ended. All Might turned off the tablet, plunging the room back into its quiet, sterile reality. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, which had sped up to a frantic, panicked pace. Izuku stared at the blank screen, his mind a maelstrom of denial and horror. That couldn't be him. The crying boy who broke his own bones just to save one person. The boy who agonized over every strategy, whose first instinct was always to protect, not to destroy. The thing in that video was a force of pure annihilation. A villain. A monster. That was me? He whispered, the words fragile, breakable. All Might's silence was his answer. The truth crashed down on Izuku with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just a hero who had pushed himself too far. He was a weapon that had misfired, a bomb that had almost detonated in the heart of a city, surrounded by his friends and innocent people. The void in his memory was not a shield, it was a mercy. His mind had recoiled from the sheer horror of his own actions. Tears, hot and shameful, began to well in his eyes, tracing clean paths through the grime on his face. They weren't tears of grief or pain, but of a profound and terrifying self-loathing. He was afraid of Shigaraki. He was afraid of all for one. But in that moment, for the first time in his life, he was truly, deeply afraid of himself. The emotional shock, combined with the extreme physical trauma his body was still enduring, was too much. The world began to swim, the edges of his vision turning gray. The beeping of the monitor grew distant, and the concerned face of All Might blurred. Young Midoriya? Izuku! His eyes rolled back in his head, and he succumbed to the darkness, not a peaceful sleep, but a frantic, desperate escape. He did not fall into a simple unconsciousness. He fell inwards. The sensation was one of falling through layers of static, of shedding the physical world, the pain, the beeping machines. He was pure consciousness, adrift in a formless, featureless void. It was not the familiar, comforting space of the vestige realm he had visited before. There were no chairs, no hazy outlines of the previous users. There was only an oppressive, echoing emptiness, then a flicker. Far off in the blackness, a single point of corrupted light ignited. It was a churning, violent spark of black and crimson, the same profane energy from the video. It pulsed like a diseased heart, and with each pulse, the void around him trembled. It was a wound. A psychic scar torn into the fabric of his own soul, into the very core of One for All. He felt an instinctual pull towards it, a horrifying fascination. He also felt a powerful, visceral repulsion. This was the source of the monster. This was the abyss that had stared back out of his eyes. Do not go near it, Ninth. The voice was calm, yet echoed with an ancient authority. Izuku spun around in the non-space. Standing behind him, their forms shimmering and unstable, were the previous wielders of One for All. They were all there, from the frail but determined form of Yoichi Shigaraki to the radiant, powerful silhouette of Nana Shimura. But they looked different. Their spectral bodies were frayed at the edges, flickering in and out of focus, as if the storm had weakened their connection to this realm. Yoichi, the first, stepped forward. His expression was one of deep, weary sorrow. He looked from Izuku to the pulsating wound of dark energy and back again. "We are glad to see your consciousness is intact, Ninth," he said, his voice a soft rustle of dry leaves. We feared it would be erased." "Erased?" Izuku asked, his own voice sounding strange and disembodied in this place. What is happening? What was that power?" "All Might said it was One for All, but it is and it is not," a gruff voice interjected. The second user, a man with sharp, severe features and a permanent scowl, took a step closer. His form was more unstable than the others, his outline crackling with residual echoes of the dark energy. "It is the Quirk's final, desperate gambit. A fail-safe we never intended to be used." Nana Shimura drifted forward, her gentle face etched with pain. She reached out a translucent hand as if to touch his cheek, but it passed through him, a cold whisper of lost warmth. "Oh, Izuku, my dear boy, what you experienced, we call it Annihilation mode. It is not a hidden quirk. It is the wrath of this one. It is the sum of all our desperation, our hatred, and our rage against All for One, stockpiled and compressed over a century, waiting for a trigger." Izuku stared at her, his mind struggling to process the revelation. "Rage? But I was grieving. I felt broken. The line between absolute grief and absolute rage is thinner than a razor's edge, my boy," Daigoro Banjo, the fifth, said, his usual boisterous energy completely absent. His spectral form looked particularly battered, his black whip tendrils seeming to droop in the oppressive atmosphere. "You felt the rage of a protector who has failed. It is the most potent and dangerous anger of all. Combined with your feeling of utter helplessness, it met the trigger conditions. You unlocked the cage we had all helped to build." Izuku looked back at the pulsing vortex. The cage. So that's what it was. A prison for a monster built from the darkest parts of his heroes. "So, it's a part of me now?" he asked, a tremor in his voice. "It has always been a part of the quirk," Haikid Shinomori, the fourth, clarified. His voice was quiet, analytical. "But it was dormant. Buried deep. Now that it has been awakened, the pathway has been forged, the cage has been weakened. The storm has been unleashed once. It will be easier to unleash it again." A chilling silence followed his words. The implication was clear. This wasn't a one-time event. This could happen again. What happens to me when it takes over?" Izuku asked, the question he was most afraid of. "All Might said I wasn't myself. I don't remember anything." It was Yoichi who answered, his expression somber and deeply apologetic. "Your consciousness is not destroyed, Ninth. It is suppressed. Pushed down, caged within your own mind while the instinct of the quirk takes control. Annihilation mode has no consciousness. It has no morality. It has only one, singular, overriding directive, to utterly annihilate the threat that triggered it, and anything that stands in its way." He gestured to the swirling vortex of dark energy. "That is its genesis. The concentrated, burning hatred my successors felt for my brother, and what he represents. It is a doomsday weapon designed to destroy him at any cost. Even the cost of the user." Nana Shimura finished, her voice breaking. "Each time it is used, it causes catastrophic damage to your physical body. But the true danger is not to your body, but to your soul. Each time the monster is let out, the cage around your own consciousness grows weaker. Use it too many times, and there is a risk, a terrible risk, that you will not be able to take back control. Your own consciousness could be permanently suppressed. Erased. Leaving only the monster behind. The words hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow, even in this non-physical space. To be trapped forever inside his own body, a helpless passenger, while a monster wearing his face rampaged and destroyed. It was a fate worse than death. It was the antithesis of everything he had ever wanted to be. A hero saves people. He doesn't become the thing they need saving from. He looked at the faces of the vestiges, these ghosts who had lived and died with this power. He saw their fear, their pity, their shared burden. They weren't just warning him. They were begging him. Then how do I stop it? He pleaded, his voice desperate. How do I keep it from ever happening again? The second user scoffed, a bitter, mirthless sound. You can't. Not really. It's part of the power now. It's part of you. He is being blunt, but he is not wrong, Yoichi said gently. It cannot be removed. The only way to prevent it from triggering is to never again feel that specific combination of righteous fury and utter helplessness. You must learn to control your emotions on a level no user has ever had to before. He paused, and the full weight of his next words settled upon Izuku. For a hero who throws himself into the fire to protect others, who feels every injustice as a personal wound, that is an impossible task. The hope that had flickered within him died, replaced by a cold, hard stone of despair. They were telling him the only way to stay himself was to stop being a hero. To stop caring so much. To let things happen. It was anathema to his very being. There must be another way. Izuku insisted, his voice trembling with a desperate fire. I can't. I won't let that thing take over. I'd rather die. And that is why you are the ninth, Nana Shimura said, a sad, proud smile touching her lips. Your heart is your greatest strength, Izuku. It must now also become your strongest shield. You cannot suppress the rage. The power is too strong. You must find a way to face it, to understand it, and perhaps, to master it. But no user has ever attempted such a thing. We do not know if it is even possible. The vestige realm began to waver, the edges of the void fraying like old cloth. The figures of the past users started to fade. You are waking up, Yoichi said, his form growing transparent. Remember, ninth. The storm is inside you now. Do not fear it. Do not fight it. You must learn to be the eye of the hurricane. You must be the calm at the center of your own wrath. His voice faded into a final, echoing whisper, and the world of blackness and swirling energy dissolved. Izuku's eyes snapped open. The first thing he saw was All Might's face, inches from his own, his expression one of sheer panic. A nurse was at his side, preparing a syringe. The beeping of the heart monitor was a frantic, high-pitched scream. He's awake! The nurse exclaimed, lowering the sedative. Young Midoriya! Are you with us? All Might's voice was tight with alarm. Izuku blinked, trying to clear his head. The memory of the vestige realm was sharp and vivid, not like a dream, but like a conversation he just had. The warning. The ghost in the storm. The terrible truth of what lived inside him now. I'm here, he managed to say, his voice hoarse. He looked past All Might, at his own reflection in the dark screen of a monitor. He saw his own face, pale and gaunt, his eyes wide with a new, deep-seated terror. But he wasn't just seeing himself. He was seeing the cage. And he could feel the monster pacing within it. Your heart rate spiked to dangerous levels. You had a seizure, All Might explained, his relief palpable but still overshadowed by concern. The doctors were worried. We thought we were losing you. I'm okay, Izuku lied, because how could he possibly explain? How could he tell his mentor, the symbol of peace, that his successor now housed a symbol of destruction? How could he explain that he had just been warned by ghosts that his own heart was now the most dangerous weapon on the planet? He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of his heart. Be the eye of the hurricane. The words echoed in his mind. He focused on the steady rise and fall of his own chest, on the feel of the sterile sheets, on the concerned face of his mentor. Slowly, agonizingly, the frantic beeping of the monitor began to slow, returning to a more normal, if still elevated, rhythm. He had survived the battle. He had survived the aftermath. But now, a new, more terrifying war was just beginning, and it would be fought not on a battlefield against villains, but in the silent, lonely space of his own soul. He looked at All Might, at the hope and fear warring in the hero's eyes, and felt the full, crushing weight of his new reality. He was Izuku Midoriya, the ninth wielder of One for All. And he was a monster waiting to happen. The day Izuku Midoriya was released from Central Hospital, there was no celebratory crowd, no cheerful gathering of friends. There was only the low, gray sky, the sterile quiet of a secure discharge wing, and the oppressive presence of men in dark, immaculate suits. They moved with a silent, coordinated efficiency that spoke of extensive training, their eyes hidden behind reflective sunglasses that seemed to absorb the world's light. They were ghosts from the Hero Public Safety Commission, and Izuku was their charge. All Might stood beside him, looking gaunt and frail in his civilian clothes, a stark contrast to the robust, unyielding figures flanking them. He offered a weak, encouraging smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's good to be out in the fresh air, isn't it, my boy?" Izuku didn't answer. The air tasted of nothing. He clutched the straps of the plain duffel bag in his trembling hand, his knuckles white. His body had been rebuilt, piece by excruciating piece, by Recovery Girl's quirk, supplemented by the best medical technology in Japan. The process had drained her, and him, leaving behind a deep, resonant ache in his bones that felt permanent. The crimson Lichtenberg scars, the branching fractals left by Annihilation Mode's energy, had faded to faint, silvery patterns on his arms and back, visible only in certain light. They were a constant, physical reminder of the monster that sucked within his skin. He was physically healed, more or less. But he was not well. A black, armored sedan, devoid of any markings, pulled up to the curb. One of the HPSC agents opened the rear door, the motion crisp and impersonal. It wasn't an invitation, it was a directive. "UA's Heights Alliance is secure, Midoriya," the agent said, his voice flat and emotionless. "We have taken the liberty of reinforcing your assigned room to Commission standards. You will be under Level 3 observation until further notice." Level 3 observation. Reinforced room. They weren't taking him home. They were transferring him to a new cell. Izuku looked at All Might, a silent, desperate question in his eyes. "Is this necessary?" All Might's gaze faltered. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm. "It is a precaution, young Midoriya. For everyone's safety. Including your own. We will sort this out. I promise." The promise felt hollow. Izuku knew this wasn't All Might's decision. The power he had unleashed had taken him out of the hands of his mentors and placed him squarely in the jurisdiction of the state. He was no longer just a student. He was a strategic asset. A Class S threat. A walking doomsday clock that the HPSC was now responsible for winding. The ride to UA was silent. Izuku stared out the tinted window, watching the world go by in a muted, detached haze. He saw civilians trying to piece their lives back together, the lingering evidence of the war visible in boarded-up windows and impromptu memorials. He should have felt a surge of empathy, a desire to help. Instead, he felt a cold, paralyzing fear. A fear that if he let himself feel anything too strongly, the red eyes would open again. Upon arriving at Heights Alliance, the Commission agents escorted him inside. The common room was empty. Aizawa-sensei had clearly arranged it this way, to spare Izuku the immediate ordeal of facing his classmates. Good. He didn't think he could handle it. He didn't know what he would say. Or what they would do. Would they look at him with concern? Or with the same terror he'd seen on the faces of the heroes in the video? His room was on the same floor, but it was different. The door was no longer wood, but a thick, metallic alloy with a digital keypad. Inside, the changes were more stark. The walls were lined with what he recognized as impact-absorbing, energy-dampening panels. The window was made of a triple-paned, reinforced plexiglass that looked thick enough to stop a tank shell. A small, unobtrusive camera was mounted in the upper corner of the ceiling, its tiny black lens a single, unblinking eye. This was not his room anymore. It was a panic room. A containment cell. And he was the thing to be contained. The lead agent handed Aizawa, who was waiting for them, a small data pad. 24/7 monitoring. Any significant emotional or bioenergetic spikes are to be reported immediately. A response team is stationed less than a minute away at all times. Aizawa's visible eye narrowed, his face a mask of weary fury. He snatched the datapad. I am his teacher, not his warden. You will report to me. Is that understood? The agent simply gave a curt nod, his duty done. He and his team turned and left without another word, their footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. The heavy metal door clicked shut, the sound of the magnetic lock engaging echoing in the small, sterile space. Izuku stood in the middle of the room, dropping his bag to the floor. He was alone with Aizawa and All Might, but the room felt crowded with the ghosts of what he had done. Midoriya. Aizawa started, his voice softer than usual. I know this is a lot. But this is temporary. We are working on it. Izuku just stared at the camera on the ceiling. He felt its gaze on him, a constant, silent judgment. He was a prisoner in his own home, surrounded by the very people he had sworn to protect, who were now being protected from him. I want to be alone, he whispered, not looking at either of them. All Might opened his mouth to protest, but Aizawa put a hand on his arm, shaking his head. They left, closing the heavy door behind them, leaving Izuku to the suffocating silence of his new reality. He walked over to his desk, where his collection of All Might figurines still stood, dusty from his long absence. He looked at their smiling, triumphant faces, symbols of a pure, simple heroism he no longer believed he was capable of. With a trembling hand, he turned each one around, so they were facing the wall. He couldn't bear to look them in the eye. The days that followed fell into a grim, monotonous routine. Izuku isolated himself completely. He attended online classes from his room, his camera off, his microphone muted unless directly addressed by a teacher. He ate the meals that were left outside his door, sometimes by Ida, sometimes by Uraraka, always with a quiet knock and a hesitant. Midoriya-kun? Are you okay in there? He never answered. He spent his time in a state of forced, meditative calm. He practiced the breathing exercises All Might had taught him, not to regulate one for all, but to suppress his own heart. Every spike of emotion, a pang of sadness seeing a sad movie clip online, a flicker of irritation when his internet connection dropped, a wave of affection thinking of his mother, was treated as a potential threat. He would immediately close his eyes, count his breaths, and push the feeling down, 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 into a deep, cold part of himself until he felt nothing but a gray, placid numbness. He avoided his reflection. When he had to use the bathroom mirror, he kept his gaze low, terrified he might catch a flicker of crimson in his own eyes. The monster, Annihilation mode, was a constant presence in the back of his mind. The vestiges were silent, their realm a psychic landscape of scar tissue he was too afraid to visit. He was utterly alone with the darkness inside him, and his only defense was to feel nothing at all. This self-imposed quarantine did not go unnoticed. The mood in Heights Alliance had soured, curdled by a mixture of fear, concern, and confusion. Class 1A was fractured. One evening, Achiko Uraraka stood outside Izuku's door for the 5th time that day, a tray of katsudon, his favorite, growing cold in her hands. She knocked softly. Deku-kun? I brought you dinner. It's from Lunch Rush. Silence. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. She placed the tray on the floor, her heart aching with a helplessness that was becoming all too familiar. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with Tenya Ida, who was approaching with his own determined stride. Uraraka-kun, he said, his voice low as he adjusted his glasses. Is there any response? No, she whispered, her gaze fixed on the cold, metal door. It's the same as always. Ida-kun, I'm really worried. He's completely shut himself off. He needs us. He needs his friends. Ida's expression was grim, his usual boisterous sense of order replaced by a somber pragmatism. While I share your concern for Midoriya-kun's mental well-being, we must also be logical. What we witnessed during the Jaka incident was a phenomenon of unprecedented danger. The Commission's protocols, while severe, are not without reason. His isolation is, for the moment, The safest course of action for the general populace, and for us. Uraraka spun on him, her brown eyes flashing with a rare fire. Safest? Ida-kun, he's not a phenomenon. He's Deku. Our friend. He's in there suffering alone, terrified of himself, and you're talking about him like he's a science experiment, or a bomb to be defused. He needs to know we're not afraid of him, are you not? Ida countered, his voice still low but sharp with intensity. Be honest with yourself, Uraraka-kun. Did that power not terrify you? The HPSC has classified it as a Class S threat, on par with All for One himself. Our friendship cannot be allowed to cloud our judgment when public safety is at stake. The rules. This isn't about rules, she shot back, her voice cracking. This is about a person, a kind, wonderful person who is breaking apart in that room, and all we're doing is leaving food at his door like he's some kind of caged animal. Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned away, unable to continue the argument. Ida stood stiffly, his own internal conflict visible in the tight line of his jaw. He was torn between his duty as class president and his loyalty as a friend, and the two had become mutually exclusive. Elsewhere, the fracture lines were just as clear. In the common room, Shoto Todoroki sat at a table, a tablet in his hands, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was scrolling through obscure physics articles on plasma containment and bioenergetic feedback loops. Mina Ishido and Toru Hagakure watched him from a distance. What's he doing? Toru's disembodied voice asked. Same thing he's been doing for days, Mina whispered back. He's trying to figure out Midori's, you know. That mode. He says if he can understand the mechanics, maybe he can help him control it. Todoroki was, in his own way, just as worried as Uraraka, but his concern manifested as a relentless, analytical pursuit of knowledge. He saw annihilation mode as a complex equation to be solved. Earlier that day, he had knocked on Izuku's door. When there was no answer, he had simply spoken to the door, his voice calm and even. Midoriya. It's Todoroki. I have been researching the energy signature reported by on-site sensors. It displayed properties inconsistent with standard bioelectricity, more akin to a negative energy state. Was there a thermal component you were aware of? Did you feel a temperature drop before the transformation? He had waited a full minute for a response that never came before turning and walking away, leaving Izuku on the other side of the door with his heart pounding, the analytical questions feeling like a doctor probing a fresh wound. But the most profound change was in Katsuki Bakugo. He had been released from the hospital a few days after Izuku, his body a roadmap of surgical scars and healing tissue. The bravado, the arrogance, the explosive temper, it was all gone, replaced by a heavy, simmering silence that was far more unsettling than his usual yelling. He spent most of his time in the training gym, pushing his recovering body to its absolute limits, his expression a mask of grim, obsessive determination. He was consumed by a guilt so profound it had reshaped his entire being. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind, his own taunt to Shigaraki. Then come on and swat me, you son of a bitch! He had been arrogant. Reckless. He had drawn the monster's attention, and Deku had been forced to the breaking point because he, Katsuki Bakugo, had not been strong enough to handle the consequences. His sacrifice, pushing Deku out of the way, felt less like a heroic act and more like a final, pathetic failure. He had become a liability, the very thing he'd always accused Deku of being, and he had become the trigger for the thing that was now destroying Deku from the inside. One afternoon, Izuku finally ventured out of his room. The suffocating silence had become too much, and he needed to get to the communal kitchen for water. He moved like a ghost, his feet silent on the floor, his senses on high alert. He prayed the common areas were empty. As he rounded the corner into the main hallway, he froze. Leaning against the wall at the far end, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, was Bakugo. He was staring out a window, his posture slumped in a way Izuku had never seen before. He looked defeated. For a moment, Izuku just stood there, his heart in his throat. He should turn back. Run. Hide in his cell. But his feet were rooted to the floor. Bakugo turned his head, and their eyes met. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. In a flash, Izuku was back on the battlefield. He saw the black tendrils, the explosion of blood, the mocking face of Shigaraki holding Bakugo's broken body aloft. Useless sacrifice, weak, footnote. The cold, coiling serpent of rage stirred in the pit of his stomach. It was a faint echo, a phantom limb of an emotion, but it was there. And it was terrifying. Izuku flinched back as if he'd been physically struck. A choked gasp escaped his lips. His hand flew to his chest, his breath catching. The gray numbness he had so carefully cultivated was shattered, and raw, primal fear flooded the void. Fear of the feeling. Fear of what it meant. Fear of what seeing Bakugo, the catalyst, could unleash. He couldn't be near him. Without a word, he spun around and fled, his footsteps now a frantic, clumsy scramble back to the safety of his room. He slammed the heavy doors shut, the magnetic lock engaging with a heavy clunk, and pressed his back against it, his body trembling uncontrollably. He slid down to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest, his breaths coming in ragged, panicked sobs. He wasn't just afraid of the memory. He was afraid because for a split second, looking at Bakugo's pained face had not filled him with sympathy, but with the ghost of the wrath that had broken the world. In the hallway, Bakugo stood frozen, his crimson eyes wide. He had watched Deku look at him with pure, unadulterated terror. The nerd who had chased after him his whole life, who had never once backed down, had looked at him like he was the monster. He had run from him. Bakugo had opened his mouth, ready to yell, to demand, to say something. Maybe, "What the hell is your problem, Deku?" Or maybe even, "I'm sorry." He didn't know. But the sound of Deku's panicked gasp and the sight of his fleeing form had stolen the words from his throat. He lowered his head, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest. It wasn't Deku's fault. It was his. He had lit the fuse. He had been the one to push him over the edge. And now, Deku was terrified of the very shadow of that moment. A new, cold resolve settled over him. This wasn't something that could be fixed with shouting or fighting. This wasn't about being the #1 hero anymore. This was about pulling his oldest rival, the only person who had ever truly seen him, back from the abyss he had helped push him into. He slammed his fist against the wall, a single, sharp crack of impact that echoed the fracturing of their relationship. But there was no heat in the action. Only a grim, silent promise. He would get stronger. Strong enough that Deku would never have to break like that again. Strong enough to face the monster inside his friend, and drag the damn nerd back out. The official meeting took place 2 weeks after Izuku's return. In a secure conference room deep within UA's primary facility, All Might and Aizawa sat across a polished table from a woman who embodied the cold, pragmatic authority of the Hero Public Safety Commission. Director Kido was a stern woman in her 50s. Her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp and analytical behind a pair of thin-rimmed glasses. "Let us be clear," Kido began, her voice crisp and devoid of preamble. She slid a tablet across the table. On its screen was a file marked with a large red S. The file name read, Asset/Threat Designation, Annihilation. Izuku Midoriya is no longer just a student. He is the possessor of a power capable of defeating high-end Nomu and even all for one's primary vessel, as demonstrated at Jakku. He is, potentially, the most powerful asset in this country. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. He is also a 16-year-old boy with no control over a power that, by our analysts' estimates, could render a 20-block radius uninhabitable if fully unleashed. That makes him the single greatest public safety risk we have ever faced. Asset and threat. The two are inseparable. He is a child who has been through immense trauma. All Might interjected, his voice tight with restrained anger. He is not a weapon to be classified. With all due respect, All Might, that is exactly what he is. Kido countered, her gaze unwavering. A weapon without a safety. And our job is to ensure that weapon does not discharge in a populated area. His current self-imposed isolation is a temporary solution. It is not a strategy. What is your long-term plan for containment and control? Aizawa leaned forward, his glare intense. His long-term plan is to be a hero. Our plan is to teach him. This power is tied to his emotional state. It requires a different kind of training, one based on mental and emotional fortitude, not just physical strength. We need time. Time is a luxury we may not have, Kido stated flatly. All for One witnessed that power firsthand. He is not the type to ignore such a development. He will want to study it, capture it, or, failing that, trigger it repeatedly to sow chaos and turn the public against Midoriya. The boy is now All for One's primary target, and every citizen around him is a potential pawn in that game. She folded her hands on the table. The Commission has already drafted several contingency plans. The most viable, should his volatility continue, is to transfer him to a specialized containment wing being constructed in Tartarus. There, he can be studied in a secure environment, and his power can be analyzed by our top scientists. We can help him learn to control it, away from the public, away from potential triggers. The word Tartarus hung in the air like a death sentence. The infamous maximum security prison. They weren't talking about helping him. They were talking about incarcerating him. Absolutely not, Aizawa snarled, rising slightly from his seat. You will not treat my student like a prisoner. I am treating him like what he is, a Class S threat, Kido repeated, her voice turning to ice. Do you have a better idea, Aizawa? One that doesn't involve hoping a traumatized teenager doesn't get angry? Because from where I stand, you are placing the lives of your other students and staff at risk every day he remains here, untrained and unstable. The truth in her words was a bitter pill. Aizawa sank back into his chair, the fire in his eyes dimming to a smoldering ember. She was right. Their current strategy was based on hope, and hope was not a defense against a power that could level cities. All Might, who had been silent, finally spoke, his voice filled with a weary, desperate strength. Give us a chance to train him. Here. Properly. Away from the public eye. We have a theory. This power, this annihilation mode, is born of his rage as a protector. Perhaps the only way to control it is not to suppress it, but to harness it. To master it. Kido considered this, her fingers drumming a silent, rhythmic beat on the table. Harness it? You speak of taming a hurricane, All Might. What if you fail? Then you can have him, Aizawa said, his voice grim. The admission cost him dearly. But you will give us that chance. You will give him that chance. He has earned that much. Kido was silent for a long moment, her gaze sweeping over the two heroes. She saw the desperation in All Might's eyes and the fierce, paternal protectiveness in Aizawa's. Very well, she conceded. You have 1 month. Show me progress. Show me a viable path to control. If, at the end of that month, he remains a volatile, uncontrollable threat, I will sign the transfer order myself. And believe me, you will not be able to stop me. She stood, her part in the meeting concluded. The hero world has changed. The public no longer has an appetite for symbols. They want security. Safety. Izuku Midoriya can be their greatest protector or their greatest fear. It is now up to you to decide which one he becomes. With that final, chilling ultimatum, she left the room, leaving the two heroes alone with the impossible task she had laid at their feet. They had 1 month to teach a terrified boy how to command a monster, or he would be lost to them forever. Deep within the cavernous, hidden chamber where his life support machinery hummed a constant, dissonant symphony, All for One was laughing. It was not a sound of mirth. It was a dry, rasping hiss that scraped its way from his ruined throat, a sound of pure, intellectual ecstasy. His physical body was a wreck, the damage from his last battle with All Might a permanent, agonizing state of being. But his mind, an archive of stolen centuries and malevolent genius, was alight with a fire he hadn't felt in years. On a massive, high-resolution monitor before him, the footage from Jaka played on a loop. It was a composite of news feeds, satellite imagery, and data stolen from the Hero Commission's own servers. He wasn't watching the hero's pathetic, coordinated efforts. He was watching one thing and one thing only, the transformation of Izuku Midoriya. He watched the green lightning of One for All, the quirk he had bestowed upon his brother, the quirk that had become the bane of his existence, sputter and die. He watched it reignite as a shrieking storm of black and crimson. He watched the boy's eyes, once so full of irritating, heroic light, become void-like pools of red. Fascinating, he breathed, the vocoder translating the whisper into a metallic rasp. Utterly fascinating, Tamura Shigaraki, his own body still a patchwork of hastily regenerated tissue and raw, angry scars, stood at his master's side. He twitched with a restless, itching energy, his gaze fixed on the screen with a mixture of hatred and grudging awe. The phantom pain of being torn apart by that power was a fresh, raw memory. "He almost killed me, master," Shigaraki growled, scratching furiously at his neck. "That power, it wasn't just strength. It felt wrong. It felt like it was erasing me." "Precisely." All for One's laughter returned, louder this time. "Do you not see the beauty of it, Tamura? For a century I have viewed One for All as a simple-minded tool. A bludgeon, a battery of stockpiled power, passed from one self-righteous fool to the next. I thought its only purpose was to grow strong enough to one day oppose me. How beautifully, wonderfully wrong I was." He gestured a weak, trembling hand towards the screen, where the monstrous Deku was driving Shigaraki through a building. "This is not some simple mutation. This is its true nature, finally revealed. The legacy of One for All isn't just power, it's hate. It's a century of my brother's weakness festering into resentment. It's the second and third user's impotent fury. It's Nana Shimura's grief. It's All Might's foolish, self-sacrificing rage. It has all been collected, compressed, and purified into an engine of pure annihilation. It's not a hero's quirk, Tamura. It's a monster's. It's a power of absolute domination, an instinct to destroy that mirrors my own. It is the quirk's true, perfect form." Shigaraki stopped scratching, his red eyes widening slightly as he began to grasp his master's meaning. "You want it, I want to understand it," All for One corrected, his tone shifting to that of a scholar discussing a rare specimen. "To steal it in its current, volatile state would be unwise. It could shatter the vessel. That power is a tantrum, an uncontrolled explosion. I need to see it again. I need to study its trigger, its mechanics, the nature of its energy. I need to know if it can be tamed, and if it can." His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Then it will be mine. Imagine, Tamura. That absolute, destructive will, guided by my intelligence. Not even All Might in his prime could have stood against such a thing. It is the key to true, unquestionable godhood." A plan began to form in the labyrinthine corridors of his mind, a multi-layered gambit designed not to defeat the heroes, but to conduct an experiment. He needed to provoke the ninth. He needed to push him to that same breaking point of helpless, protective rage. But it couldn't be a simple, brutish attack. The first trigger was the near death of his rival, a deeply personal, emotional catalyst. A repeat of that scenario would be difficult to orchestrate and predictable. No, he needed a different approach. He needed psychological warfare. He needed an artist of cruelty. His mind sifted through the vast library of quirks and personalities he had collected and observed over the years. He needed precision. He needed range. He needed someone who understood the hollow hypocrisy of hero society, someone who could deliver not just physical attacks, but verbal and emotional ones that would strike at the very core of Izuku Midoriya's being. The choice became clear. A name, a face, a quirk. A fallen hero rotting in the depths of Tartarus, her spirit already broken and remade by the very system she had once served. "The board is set," All for One mused aloud. "But we require a new piece. A hunter. One who knows how to wound a hero without killing them." He turned his unseen gaze towards Shigaraki. "Tamura, it is time we liberated some of the Commission's more valuable prisoners. There is a woman in Tartarus. A sniper. Her name is Kanat Tsutsumi. You may know her better as Lady Nagant." Shigaraki's lips curled into a dry, cracked smile. He remembered the name. The rising star of the HPSC, the perfect hero who had snapped and murdered her handler. A beautiful story of disillusionment. "A sniper? You want to shoot him?" "No," All for One corrected, a chilling patience in his voice. "I want her to shoot at him. I want her to miss. I want her to systematically and surgically dismantle his heroic spirit in front of a live audience. Her mission will not be to capture or kill Izuku Midoriya. It will be to goad the monster out of its cage, and we will be watching." 2 weeks later, the city was on edge. A new villain had emerged, one who moved with the terrifying efficiency of a ghost. There were no grand pronouncements, no monologues, just sudden, shocking acts of precision violence. A support cable on a suspension bridge was severed during rush hour, causing a multi-car pileup. A fuel tank at a power plant was ruptured, leading to a massive, controlled evacuation. A window-washing platform on a skyscraper was dropped, its occupants saved only by the frantic, last-second intervention of a local hero. These were not acts of mass destruction. They were surgical strikes, each one designed to create maximum chaos and endanger the maximum number of civilians, forcing heroes into desperate, high-stakes rescue operations. And at the center of it all was a single, elusive figure, a woman with a rifle for an arm and hair like a two-toned sunrise. Lady Nagant. Izuku learned of her rampage from his reinforced room. He watched the news reports, his stomach churning with a nauseating mix of duty and terror. He should be out there. With his combination of quirks, danger sense to anticipate the attacks, black whip and float to navigate the urban environment, he was uniquely suited to track and confront a villain like her. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to go, to help, to save people. But the fear kept him paralyzed. What if he got angry? What if a civilian was injured, and he felt that familiar, helpless rage? What if he saw her corner a child, just like the news was reporting, and the red haze descended? The HPSC had him on a leash so short he could barely breathe, and Aizawa and All Might had been clear. He was not to engage. He was to stay put, to continue his emotional suppression training, to be the calm at the center of the storm. But the storm was outside, and it was getting worse. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Izuku was in the middle of a breathing exercise, trying to push down a spike of anxiety caused by a news headline, when his phone buzzed with a priority alert. It was All Might, young Midoriya. His mentor's voice was grim and strained over the phone. There's been an incident. Nagant has taken hostages. A dozen civilians, including children, on the rooftop of the KBO tower downtown. She's demanding to speak with you. Izuku's blood ran cold. Me? Why me? We don't know, All Might admitted. But she's made it clear she will start executing hostages if you don't appear. The Commission has authorized your deployment. On a strictly provisional basis, Endeavor and Hawks are en route to provide support, but you are to be the primary contact. The room felt like it was shrinking. This was it. The test. The thing he had been dreading. They weren't just letting him off the leash. They were pushing him into the lion's den. I can't, Izuku stammered, his hand gripping the phone so tightly it creaked. All Might, what if I lose control? You will not. All Might's voice was firm, a desperate attempt to project a confidence either of them felt. Remember your training. Breathe. Anchor yourself. You are in command, my boy. Not the rage. You. This is what it means to be a hero. To face your fear and act anyway. People are counting on you. The words, meant to inspire, felt like a death sentence. But he was right. People were counting on him. He couldn't hide in his room while children were in danger. The hero in him, buried under layers of fear and self-loathing, finally stirred. I'll go, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He hung up and stood, his body trembling. He walked to his closet and pulled out his repaired costume, the new version All Might had commissioned for him, Gamma, but with reinforced materials. It felt alien, the costume of a stranger. He wasn't the same boy who had worn it with such pride. As he suited up, he felt the oppressive weight of the world on his shoulders. He wasn't just going to fight a villain. He was going into battle with himself. The flight to Kibyo Tower was a blur of wind and roaring anxiety. He pushed one for all to a low, stable 30%, using float and the occasional burst from his Air Force gloves to propel him across the city. His danger sense was a low, persistent thrum at the base of his skull, a constant reminder of the threat that lay ahead. He focused on his breathing, on the rhythmic in and out, trying to achieve the placid numbness that had become his only defense. He arrived to a scene of controlled chaos. Police had cordoned off a 10-block radius. Heroes were working to evacuate the lower floors of the massive skyscraper. High above, on the rooftop observation deck, he could see them, a group of people huddled together, and a single, stark figure standing at the edge. Lady Nagant. He landed on the roof of an adjacent building, taking cover behind an air conditioning unit. Hawks landed silently beside him a moment later, his expression unusually grim. Endeavor hovered in the air a few hundred feet back, a silent, fiery guardian. She hasn't harmed any of them yet, Hawks reported, his voice low. She just waits. It's a performance. She knows we're all watching. Izuku peeked over the edge. Nagant was a striking figure, her pink and purple hair a vibrant slash of color against the gray sky. Her right arm was the sleek, metallic barrel of a rifle, which she rested casually on her hip. She exuded an aura of bored, professional confidence that was deeply unsettling. All right, Deku, what's the plan? Hawks asked. Plan. Izuku's mind was blank. His usual frantic, muttering analysis was gone, suppressed by his desperate need to remain calm. His only plan was to not get angry. I'll talk to her, he said, his voice unsteady. Try to reason with her. Find out what she wants. Hawks gave him a sharp, assessing look. Kid, she's a former pro-hero who murdered someone in cold blood and escaped from Tartarus. I don't think she's in a reasoning mood. Be careful. She's goading you, Izuku knew. But what other choice did he have? He took a deep, shuddering breath, pushed off from the roof, and floated across the gap, landing softly on the observation deck of KBO Tower, about 50 feet from where Nagant stood with her hostages. Her head turned, and her lips, painted a dark purple, curled into a smirk. Well, look what the Commission let out of its cage. The symbol of fear himself. I was beginning to think you wouldn't show. Her voice was smooth, melodic, but laced with a cynical, mocking tone. The hostages, a mix of families and tourists, whimpered, their eyes wide with terror. A small boy, no older than 7, started to cry. Let them go, Izuku said, trying to keep his voice even, trying to project an authority he didn't feel. They have nothing to do with this. Your fight is with me. Nagant laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound. Oh, you sweet, naive little hero. You still think it works like that? That there are rules? They have everything to do with this. They are the stage, the audience, and the props. She raised her rifle arm, not aiming it at him, but casually gesturing towards the huddled group. They are here to see what you do. To see if the hero who can level a city block will save them, or if his famous hesitation gets them killed. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to prick his insecurities, to stoke the embers of his frustration. He felt a flicker of anger, hot and sharp. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3. He pushed it down. Numbness. He needed the numbness. What do you want, Nagant? He asked, forcing himself to focus. What do I want? She tilted her head, her expression one of mock contemplation. I want to expose the sham. The lie that you and your handlers at the Commission represent. They parade you around as a symbol of hope, but they keep you in a reinforced box because they're terrified of what you are. They told me about you, you know. When they gave me my mission, Izuku's eyes widened. The Commission gave you a mission? Oh, not officially, she said with a dismissive wave. This little reunion was orchestrated by a much more influential party. But the Commission's fear? That's all their own. They see you as a monster, Deku, a rabid dog that they can occasionally point at their enemies. They don't care about you. They care about your power. Her eyes, a piercing shade of pink, locked onto his. They're just like the people who trained me. The ones who told me to be a perfect, smiling hero while ordering me to execute problematic individuals in the shadows. The ones I killed. The hero system is a lie, built on sacrifice and stained with blood. And you are their newest, bloodiest sacrifice. Her words hit him harder than any physical blow. They echoed the very fears that had been festering in his own heart. The reinforced room, the constant surveillance, the way the agents treated him, was she right? Was he just a tool? He felt the rage stir again, stronger this time. Rage at her for endangering these people. Rage at the Commission for putting him in this position. Rage at the world for being so broken. Breathe, Midoriya. Breathe. He fought it back, the effort making his muscles tremble. He couldn't let her get to him. He had to focus on the hostages. He activated Black Whip, sending a single, thin tendril snaking across the rooftop, hidden from her line of sight. He was trying to create an anchor point, something to pull the hostages towards if he could create a distraction. Nagant saw the movement out of the corner of her eye. Her smirk widened. Tricks? Already? I'm disappointed. I thought you'd at least try to give me the hero's speech first. Without another word, she swiveled, her rifle arm coming up with impossible speed. She fired. The sound was a sharp crack. It wasn't aimed at him. It wasn't aimed at a hostage. The bullet, a specially crafted projectile that curved in midair, struck the wall of the rooftop access building, ricocheting off it and then off a metal railing, before striking the concrete floor just inches from a young woman's foot. The woman screamed, scrambling backwards. It was a warning shot. A demonstration of impossible skill. She could have hit any of them, at any time. She was toying with them. With him. You see? Nagant said, her voice dropping to a cold, dangerous whisper. I can put a bullet wherever I want. Through a hero's eye from a mile away. Or through a child's knee. The only reason these people are still breathing is because I'm allowing it. Your move, Hero. Izuku's control was slipping. The carefully constructed dam of numbness was cracking under the relentless pressure of her psychological assault. His hesitation wasn't a strategy. It was a cage of fear, and she was right. It was endangering people. The longer he waited, the more she controlled the situation. He had to act. He abandoned stealth. Pouring more power into his legs, he shot forward, a green blur of motion. His plan was simple: get between her and the hostages, create a barrier, and force a direct confrontation. She was ready for him. As he moved, she fired again. Another trick shot. The bullet ricocheted off a steel beam, forcing him to alter his trajectory, to swerve mid-dash. It was a calculated move to slow him down. In the split second he was off balance, she moved. She wasn't just a sniper, she was an athlete. She backflipped over the huddled hostages, landing lightly on the other side of them, her rifle now aimed directly at the crying little boy. Izuku's heart stopped. Wrong move, Nagant said, her voice devoid of its earlier mockery. It was now as cold and hard as the barrel of her gun. You thought you could just bull rush me? You're just a child. You have all the power in the world, and you're still just a clumsy, predictable child. He was frozen. He was 50 feet away. The boy was right in front of her. Any move he made, any attack he launched, would endanger the child. He was trapped. Utterly, completely trapped. The feeling washed over him, as familiar and as terrifying as a recurring nightmare. Helplessness. The absolute, crushing inability to protect someone right in front of him. It was the same feeling he'd had watching Bakugo get impaled, and with it came the rage, not a flicker this time. Not an echo. It was a tidal wave. A consuming inferno. His desperate attempts to breathe, to stay calm, to hold on to the numbness were swept away in a torrent of pure, righteous fury. The faces of the terrified hostages, the sound of the child sobbing, Nagant's smug, cynical words, the commission's cage, the ghost's warning, it all swirled together into a single, unbearable point of pressure in his chest. His vision began to tint red at the edges. No, a small, terrified part of his mind screamed. Not now. Not here. Nagant saw the change. She saw the green lightning around him flicker, stutter, and then begin to darken, tinged with a sinister crimson. A genuine, intrigued smile touched her lips. This was it. This was the phenomenon her new master wanted to see. There it is, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Come on. Show me. Show me the monster they're so afraid of. She deliberately pressed the barrel of her rifle against the side of the little boy's head. The child went rigid with terror, his crying silenced by sheer shock. His mother screamed, a raw, primal sound of agony. That was the final push. The last key turning in the lock. The scream in his own mind was drowned out by a roar that was not his own. The world dissolved into a sea of red and black. His consciousness, the part of him that was Izuku Midoriya, felt like it was being pushed down, 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 into a tiny, dark room in the back of his own skull. He was a prisoner, looking out through a blood-red window at a world he could no longer control. The last thing he saw before the monster took over completely was Nagant's triumphant, smiling face. She had won. She had goaded the monster out of its cage.